Hello and welcome to my show. My name is Rishanka Jones, and today I have a very special guest. Her name is Romina Keshishyan. She's an attorney and has her own legal practice in the state of California. She specializes in workers' compensation, labor and employment law. And the most exciting part about her life and personality is that she's a clairvoyant. So today we're going to dive into her legal practice, how she started it as a female entrepreneur. Welcome, Romina. How are you?
Thank you, Rishanka, for having me. I'm glad to be here. I'm very well.
So, Romina, before we dive into how you started the legal practice and also, of course, your clairvoyant abilities, which I'm super excited to talk about, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you ended up in the legal practice?
Yes, so I was born in Glendale, California to immigrant parents. The reason why I became a lawyer is because ever since I was a kid, I always knew that I was going to practice law. But the other reason is when 9/11 happened, we were in the state of Colorado, and my father actually lost his job and couldn't find a job. And so I decided that I wanted to help employees out because they were being discriminated or harassed because of their ethnicity. We moved back to Glendale, finished high school. I attended Berkeley for undergrad and then Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, and then the rest was history.
That is a very interesting childhood story. And now that we spoke about how you ended up in law, I want to understand what is your legal specialty?
Currently, what we do is we represent employees in California in most matters of employment. So that includes claims of discrimination, harassment, retaliation, wage issues, not getting compliant meal and rest breaks, not getting paid overtime. And we also do on the job injuries. So it's called workers' compensation cases. So the law firm is sort of a one-stop shop, if you will, for any employee who has any sort of issues.
That's like a vast pool of things that you're catering to, but that's fantastic. All right, so moving on, we understand you're a lawyer, you have your own law firm in the state of California. And when we were talking before the podcast, you mentioned that you started the law firm at a very young age. I want to hear about that journey. What inspired you to do that, and how easy or difficult was it to break into a man's world? Oftentimes, I've had to assert myself to convey my point. Did you face a lot of that when you were setting up your law firm, and how do you navigate that?
I always knew that I wanted to have a family, and I wanted the independence of being able to select the clientele and the types of claims that I wanted to represent individuals on. And so when I graduated law school, I ended up working at a firm for 2 years, and I exclusively litigated state and federal class actions. And through the experiences working with clients and just generally litigating and traveling a lot, I realized that I wanted to change my life pace. And I knew that even if I made $5, I knew that I would be very happy because at least I had autonomy over my work schedule and the people that I got to represent. Starting the firm was very interesting because I wasn't starting and running the firm from the perspective of how do I monetize this? I was running it from the perspective of how can I help people and how can I put myself out there? I certainly had a lot of challenges in the beginning, especially because I was 28 years old. I remember a former client's wife turned to me and say, "What do you know about the law? You're only 28 years old." Or what do you know about running a law firm? And so having that experience. And so knowing early on and sort of being the wisdom of not responding egoically to that question, that really helped because it was hurtful to have received that. But I think that the answer that I gave over those first few years was that I knew what I was doing. I wasn't a jaded attorney. I knew the law, I knew how to litigate, and I was fiercely going to rip the meat off the bone if I needed to advocate for my clients. And they felt that. And so in the beginning, of course, with defense counsel, because it is a male-dominated field. I even think still today it's a male-dominated field. My husband, he joined my practice 3 years ago, so we co-run and operate it currently. We still get emails with defense counsel just emailing my husband.
Wow.
And leaving me out of correspondences. But in the beginning, when I was much younger, it was just a whole other sort of battle of having to prove myself. And the way that I did it was in my telephonic conversations with defense counsel when they thought I was just this little girl filing cases. And when I would start sort of for lack of a better way of saying it, spitting the law and sort of running circles around them, hyper litigating, doing hundreds of document requests, deposition notices, deposing witnesses. Pretty soon, I think that changed the frequency by which these law firms perceived my level of expertise and who I was as a person. And suddenly gender didn't have anything to do with it for them.
Wow. It's anyway so hard for women to break into any field. It's not just law, honestly. Do you think it's harder for women who are a minority? I consider myself a minority here. I'm South Asian, you're Armenian. Do you think it's a little bit harder than what other women face who are born and brought up here?
I think so. Obviously, I can only speak from the perspective of being an Armenian business owner and female. And I had an arbitration case, where our retired judge, when I was stating my appearance, this judge said, Romina and he couldn't pronounce my last name. And he's like, it would have been so much easier if your last name was Smith. And, it was hard to sort of receive that. Even now, it's 2025, and you think that things have changed. And so I certainly think that the added layer of being part of a minority group, it does contain challenges, because I'm not a part of a group of people that already kind of have the preset privileges of being a litigator. But I also think that the advantage is that a lot of our clients who come from different walks of life, they tend to gravitate towards that, because in their mind, they're thinking, this person can understand my struggle.
Romina, that's some very interesting experiences that you've shared with us today. We're going to dive into your legal career a little more in a bit, but I want to ask you a few questions about your clairvoyant abilities. When did you first realize you had this ability, and how did it affect you? Were you confused? Did you talk to your parents? And since when have you known this?
I think a lot of people would be surprised that I am talking about it in a podcast, just because I've always held it close to my heart, my experiences. But essentially, I felt those abilities ever since I was a child. I was very, very young. But over the years, those abilities or those senses became so much more heightened, and I became so much more exact. And when I really realized that, I don't think these are just a series of coincidences. Before law school, I moved to Armenia for a few months, and I volunteered for a human rights NGO. And we went to a village, and it's like 30, 40 people. The program is called Birthright Armenia. And so we go into this village, and this old grandma says, I'm going to make Armenian coffee, the espresso shot coffees with the saucers. Who knows how to read coffee mugs or coffee cups? And so I lied as a joke, as a practical joke. I said, I do. I'll read everyone's coffee mugs. And then I proceeded to read the people's coffee mugs, and I saw symbols. So I was just telling them what I saw. And soon, quickly after the first few, people started to sort of freak out. And I was just very exact in what I was seeing. And so in the beginning, it was really, really exciting. But then over the years, when I would do it for friends and family, it started to become a little bit daunting. I started to see things like someone's father is going to have a heart attack. And so I communicated those things to the people that I knew, and they would come back to me days later, weeks later, telling me that what you saw was correct. And so that sort of freaked me out. So I stopped doing readings for a while, and it sort of manifested then into the law and running the business. And I am a clairvoyant, but there's also several other clairs. Clairvoyance is the idea or the act of being able to use your extrasensory vision, and the vision comes to you. But I have clairaudience, which means that sounds can come to me. I also have clairsentience, which is the feeling, and claircognizance, which is knowing. So sometimes things will come to me where it's just, I know things to be. I don't monetize off of this craft, but I certainly use it in my day-to-day, every single day in my practice, in talking and consulting with potential clients and dealing with defense attorneys or in litigation, because, it's so revelatory and I get to help my clients out. So why not?
Okay, so you're clairvoyant, and I want to hear a little bit more about the coffee mugs. So, how do you read a coffee mug or a saucer? Like, do you just see symbols on it, or do you see a picture on it? What shows up? And is this a thing?
Yeah.
Is this something that other people do as well, or it's just like specific to your kind of reading?
Once when the person drinks it and they know it and they're doing it with the intention of me reading their cup and they're sort of giving me that permission to do that, I immediately see signs and symbols, and I will actually take a toothpick or something and I'll point to the sign or symbol so that they can see it with me. And 9 times out of 10, they see it. And so I will tell them what I see. They typically tend to piece together those things, but I could not know anything about someone's life, and I could see things that they've known to be true. And I never ask for confirmation because I don't do this as a matter of like a hobby or craft. You can really get a lot of heavy material about people's lives. I would say my strongest medium is doing coffee readings, but I'm able to use tarot cards as well to read and see things, mostly present and future, some past revelations about people.
Walk me through that process. What do you see? And, is it sometimes visual, sometimes auditory? Like, what happens to you? What is that feeling?
So with coffee cups, it's a seeing and feeling what the received symbolism. With tarot cards, it's actually reading what the tarot is saying, matched with the person's energy that's right in front of me, because I can read people's energies and auras and kind of feel what they're going through.
When did you start talking to people about this? This power or this clairvoyance? Like, were you afraid that people would judge you, think that you're lying? Because these days there's so many people on YouTube putting up stuff, right? You just don't know who's telling the truth or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say right now, during this podcast, is when I feel most comfortable. But all jokes aside, I think over the years, especially with the coffee cup readings that happen, I think since then, I sort of wait for the conversation to come up, or if it ever does, and I kind of, I guess, use my senses to be able to then see if that's something that's appropriate or relevant to bring up. For a very long time, I was very hesitant to tell people. And then over the years, I think in the last, I would say 1 to 2 years, I'll just tell people because I felt and I saw COVID happening before it happened, the fires happening before it happened in January in California, and a lot of other major life events, both from my family life and also just outwardly, worldly. Those obviously freaked me out a lot more. And so I've spent the last 1 to 2 years really trying to figure out how I can use this and not be scared of it, because it is a scary experience. I've been working with a mentor. We've had a few sessions for the past year, and she's really helped me understand how to accept it and come from the perspective of welcoming that.
You said that your clients would be shocked if they found out that you're clairvoyant. And I think after this podcast, maybe some of them do find out. So, which brings me to my next question. Do you use your clairvoyant abilities sometimes on your cases or just to understand your clients better? Because so many times, and I know law is a field where you do not have to, especially if you're a criminal lawyer, ethics, morals don't play a part, right? You have to represent someone, even if they've been charged for murder or rape or whatever, you represent that person to prove their case, whether it's a right thing or a wrong thing. In those kind of cases, and I know you're not dealing with murder and rape, but there is workers' compensation, there's labor and employment, and people lie to get money out of companies. Do you sense that? Do you see it?
I see it 100% of the time. So I use these abilities every single day in my practice. I can't help it because it's not that like I turn on I press a button and I say, okay, time to tap into these psychic powers. And so I take the time to hear a person's story because in that it's so revelatory. They'll talk about something that happened in the workplace, but in my experience, I see and sense and feel other things, personal factors that would play in and how that could help them in their case. And so I use it all the time with consultations. And in using it in consultations, I've also declined to represent individuals where I felt that maybe they weren't being very forthcoming about what actually happened.
That's amazing. So that means you have full conviction that what you're seeing or hearing is true. You have faith in your ability, and there's no doubt that this could just be an illusion, because it's very difficult to differentiate between intuition and illusions with an
Mm-hmm.
actual psychic power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of us get intuition, a lot of us get visions, and it could be a dream, but we just don't know if this is like my higher power or not. But it seems
Right.
like you are very convinced that this is true. You've had people tell you that what you've said to them has come true. Can you give me an example of an incident where you actually gauged the defense lawyer and were able to find something that really helped your case?
Yeah, well, I'd have to think about that because with defense lawyers, it's really about trying, like, I will break character and try to infuse some part of my personal life to get them talking. Because when someone only talks about the law, they'll say the same shtick. And so I try to get them to talk about something else. Sort of, they kind of, their guard is down in a way. And so when they start talking about things that are unrelated to the law, I have one instance where the defense attorney would tell me sort of a little bit about their personal life. And I told them, well, it sounds like you're going to be getting married very, very soon. And then they got proposed to, called me back maybe like a few months later and said, okay, so we need to settle this case so that I can focus on my wedding or something. I think the point is that it does offer a level of connection that I think a lot of legal practitioners don't use or don't know to use. I really try to humanize the practice of law because, for me, I'm advocating for clients that have been working their lives and giving their loyalty to these employers, and these employers will just summarily terminate their employment without even blinking. And so for me, I do take it personally. And so when I take it personally, I try to infuse that humanity in the way that I deal with defense counsel to diffuse them and use the things that I glean about their lives to sort of help me in that.
So, do you think, Romina, that there's a specific area in law? I want to connect these two things about you and ask you questions about that, where your clairvoyance could really help. Because I know, and I understand you're not doing criminal law, right? But I'm sure you do have friends who are in criminal law or, similar subset of criminal law. Do you think your clairvoyance could help in finding a missing person, or these mystery stories of like people just disappearing or like getting kidnapped? Or have you ever I know this is a little controversial and probably you don't want to talk about it, but have you had a friend or someone ask you about something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't had any criminal attorneys or anyone in sort of the police field or academy or any of law enforcement essentially ever contact me because I don't talk about the ability to be able for me to see and hear and feel these things. But what I will say is that if I experience this and use it in my profession, in my specialty, then it will absolutely be very valuable in the specialties of criminal law, for example. The closest I can tell you is when I take depositions of witnesses, and these are supervisors of my clients, I'm able to study them and understand them to be able to break them down in a deposition so that they start admitting things that they didn't even think that they were going to admit.
And what is the feeling like? Does your body get warm, or do you start getting shivers, or is there a blurry vision?
So it manifests in many ways. I guess the best way that I can say it is that my whole body, it just takes over my whole body. If you've ever seen the show That's So Raven, I don't know if it was on Nickelodeon or Disney, but a lot of friends that knew back then that I had certain abilities, they always joke and would ask, is it something that happens to you in the same way that that character, she would sort of kind of look in the ether and kind of freeze. But what I would say is that sometimes it'll just stop me in my tracks and then I just see it. I see visions. Sometimes I'll have whispers and sounds and music. And other times I'll just kind of have that signs, symbolic signs. And
So it seems like you get a lot of signals, and it's a series of signals which kind of leads up to an event. It doesn't all come together in one time. It kind of unfolds slowly.
it can, yeah, it can come together just all at once, but there are times when it'll come and fold and layer itself. definitely.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you saw for COVID
Yeah.
and when was it? Because COVID hit, I think, March of 2020, right?
hmm
When did you see it coming?
December 2019. December 2019, I was posting on Instagram about how there was a lot of shifts that were happening with respect to kind of the economy. And I remember just having visions. And I remember there was one particular night in late December where it was like a trance like state where I just sort of felt catatonic. I couldn't move.
Hmm.
And all I did was just tell my husband, the whole world is going to change very soon. Everyone is going to be in their homes. No one is leaving. There's going to be riots, people standing on top of vehicles, breaking cars, fires. Like, the whole world is going to turn upside down. And so my husband was looking at me like, okay, so, what does that even mean? Right. And so when COVID happened and the pandemic hit, I came from a position, I know it sounds weird, but it came from a position of power. I didn't hesitate. I set the firm I already set up so that we were ready to take remote calls, remote appearances. Like it was almost a kind of a weird, like the pre-signaling of if this is what's going to happen in life, then how can I preserve us and the business and all of these things. And so it was probably one of the most scariest premonitions that I've ever had in my life, just because it was so vivid. And so seeing it manifest before me, people dying, the whole world changing, it was very, very creepy and scary. And so that kind of made me want to not tap into that, just because I didn't want to see what was next for all of us.
Does your law firm, I'm sure you have a big team. Do people in your law firm know that you're clairvoyant?
Yeah, so it's funny. Maybe last year or maybe the last 2 years, we made jokes about it,
Hmm.
just to sort of test the waters and see. And
Yeah.
last October, I dressed up as a fortune teller for Halloween, very
Hmm.
apropos. I told my staff, you all will only have one reading, tarot reading. Each of you can have a reading, and that's it. Never again.
Yeah.
And so I really think they all just sort of approached it initially from the perspective of like, this is funny. Every single person came out of my office like gut punched, because I was able to tell them exactly what was happening in their lives. Every single staff member. And so Armand, my husband, he makes the joke. He's like, they're probably low key terrified of you now, because it's from the perspective of being an employer,
Oh,
their
yeah.
boss, and then now also add this added layer of me actually knowing what they're about. But
You
yeah.
use this power or ability when you're hiring employees.
Oh my God, I do. I do. Um, I
How does
used
it
to
help?
not. I used to not actually, admittedly, in the beginning, I was sort of, I would do the traditional, well, these are the questions, and maybe we should ask this and then kind of see if it's a fit, but I wouldn't tap into that. How do I see this person in this setting? How do we all coexist and get along? Because we spend most hours of our day working together with our colleagues and coworkers.
I need a reading from you, Romina, now after this podcast. But this has been such a fantastic conversation. And I feel like, there's so many different things we can talk about in addition to what we have already. But before we leave, two things I want to understand. Do you have a spiritual practice or a ritual that you do to connect with your higher inner self? That's one. And the other thing is, what is one thing that you would want your audience to take away from this podcast?
Mhm.
Um, I don't want them going back confused that you're a lawyer, you're a clairvoyant. Like, which one do we take?
Mhm. Yeah, so it's interesting because I think just generally what I've seen through social media, or just generally when I have talked to people, they'll have a set ritual. I don't. I don't have a ritual. I think the best way I can describe it is that I do a lot of meditation. I do a lot of journaling, do a lot of
Mhm.
reading, a lot of introspection. I know people have asked me, how can I be a psychic or how can I be intuitive? And I think the best answer is trying to live a life that you're not in contradiction. And I think that's been one of the things, that's been my ritual, is that anytime if I've ever felt like any person or thing has ever or will ever encroach on my being able to be free and live a life of that didn't have contradiction, then I'd either stop having them as an employee or stop being friends with them. It's very much this power in wanting to be as centered as possible and to be as meditative as possible to receive experiences and go with those experiences. I don't know, the lighting of the candles and not to take away from those practices.
Yeah.
To me, I'm a very like I'm a very conservative intuitive, if that makes sense. I'm
Yeah.
more of the, I rather just kind of be as centered as possible. I love doing yoga, and kind of center myself that way and try to still the chaos and the chaotic sense. So if something is giving off a lot of energy, I might not participate in that event or interact with those people. And so that helps me become as centered as possible to do what I do.
Do you think energy is real? Like, so many times I meet people and I just feel uneasy and I just want to leave the room.
1,000,000%.
And
One
I
million.
don't want to talk to them again.
That
I
is,
feel like I've just reached a stage in my life where if I'm getting a bad feeling about something, I just cut that out, that
mhm,
portion, that person from my life, and I'm just so much happier. But
absolutely.
yeah, I want to know from someone like, who has this skill and power. How do you know if it's just your crazy mind or it's
Yeah.
a true thing?
Yeah, I think one question I get asked definitely is, how do you know it's intuition versus not? And kind of that molds into, how do you read people and how do you know if it's what you're reading or what your paranoia might be telling you? Because, you have traumas or things that might give you that proclivity to think that people are not good. What I will say is that I think energy and people, when you're open to it, right? Like if you believe in it, then it is true. Right. And so
Mhm.
if you believe in the power of energy, then 100% it's going to be true in your practice, in your day to day, and in interacting with people, because people will give so many cues about themselves. And I'm not just talking about like visually, but sometimes in the way that they speak or the way that they may maintain their eye contact, their aura, their body. I mean, it's just sort of a culmination of everything. And so when you get a bad feeling about somebody, that's not just some coincidence or you just being paranoid. I really certainly think that it is because you're reading an energy and that energy is not agreeable with yours. It could be not agreeable for that moment, for that hour, or it could just be that that person does not meld with your energy because you sense that there's something about them, their life, their journey that might not be compatible with yours. And I'm so big on that. I'm so big on just reading and sensing people and their goodness, and that also is what helps me open up to certain people versus not opening up to certain. Like, I will say the craziest thing about my life to a person that I barely know, but I know them to be good and I know them to be true. Whereas maybe I've known someone for 20, 30 years and I wouldn't be able to do the same for whatever reason.
I feel the exact same way. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I
This
mean,
has
this is
been
why
a,
we're here, right? Like, I
yeah,
didn't think we were going to even be talking about this, but here you are.
yeah.
You're such a good-natured and you emit such positive energy. And so to me, I felt very comfortable sharing this part of my life that I've been very, very fiercely protective of and very kind of cagey about.
I'm very grateful you could openly do that here, and I created a safe space for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I
Um,
appreciate that.
Romina, are you okay with me putting the link to your website and your email address at the bottom if anybody wants to get in touch with you?
Yes. If you want to get in touch with me for legal reasons, you're more than welcome to contact us. Absolutely. We give free consultations for employees.
Okay, great. So the clairvoyant bit is just for family and friends for now,
For
unless
now,
you
yeah.
really need help.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome.
I appreciate
But
that.
it was such a pleasure having you on the show, Romina, and I cannot wait to get a reading done from you. So
Thank you. Yeah, I know.
thank you so
Let's see
much.
what happens. Thank you, Rishanka. I really appreciate you having me.
Of course.
Bye.
This is Rishanka Jones, and if this episode, added some value in your life or helped you out, you learned something today, please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have any questions, suggestions, please feel free to write them down in the comment section. I'm usually in the comment section for an hour after I upload my videos. But if you do want to get in touch with Romina for any kind of legal help, feel free to reach out to her. Her email address and her website is going to be linked. Until then, this is Rishanka Jones signing off.